I love playing ball. This is one of the greatest things that I could do with my life. I love playing ball. I gets to be springtime, and I just get my glove out, and I just hold it up to my nose, and I smell it for a while. And I get out the glove oil, and I start oiling up my glove. I've only had 2 of these in my life. 2. I had one from the time I was 12 until I was about 30. And the only reason I put it away is because a couple of my friends said, you know what, you're going to want to hand that down to your kids someday. Because my dad bought me that glove when I was 12. And I went out and I bought this one. So I've had this one for about 15 years now. And I baby this thing. I mean, when it gets to be wintertime, I don't just throw this into a closet and forget about it. I mean, I put a couple of balls in here and I wrap it up tight and I make sure that it's taken care of. And I make sure that it's preserved. And those of you who love a sport or love a musical instrument or have that kind of desire to do something, you know what I'm talking about. You know how that thing is something that you just hold so precious that you want to take care of it. And that's the way I am. And so for me, it's this glove. I don't do it, I've got a whole garage full of sporting equipment, and I've got footballs, and I've got hockey sticks, and I've got basketballs, and I've got all that stuff. And all that stuff can grow dust, and all that stuff will sit in my garage all the time, and it gets all nasty and everything else, and I don't care. But this means something to me. And if one of the straps starts to go, people say, you should cut those straps. I'm like, I'd be like cutting off my arm or doing damage to myself on purpose. I would never do that. I would never hurt my glove. Because although in my intellectual mind, I know this glove has no feelings, deep inside me where it counts, I know that it talks to me, and I know that it can hear me, and I know that it has feelings. And I would never do anything to hurt this glove on purpose, because it means a lot to me. It has a purpose for me. And I want to talk to you guys about purpose today, because purpose is something that's really meaningful to me. I want to tell you guys my life story. I know that I was told that I have until 11:25, and at 11:26, you guys all stand up and walk out, whether I'm done or not. So 11:25 is my goal, but I want to take a couple of minutes because not everybody here knows who I am or knows my story. So I was raised in a Christian home, all right? And although that might not mean the same thing to all of us, I'll give it to you. That means that my mom and my dad, they tried to teach me about Jesus, and they tried to raise me up in the right way. And Sunday morning, you went to church and Sunday school. Didn't matter how bad you felt, didn't matter what was going on in your life, doesn't matter how late you stayed up the night before. Sunday morning, you got up and you went to church and Sunday school. And so every Sunday morning, I got to wake up. You got to get up, drug out of bed by your ear. You go downstairs, you have breakfast, you make sure you're ready for church. We go out, we leave the house at 9:15-ish, and you're going to go to Sunday school. And so that's the way I was raised. Well, when I was about 4 years old, I was in Sunday school, and my Sunday school teacher told me about heaven and hell. And heaven is this wonderful place, and hell is this place of burning, painful ickiness, and you don't want to go there. And she said, how many people would like to go to heaven? Sounds a lot better to me. I'm in. Even at 4 years old, I knew that. So I went out in the hallway of my basement church, and I prayed the prayer she told me to pray, and that was my ticket. I had my ticket. I officially was going to heaven now, and nobody could take that away from me. And that's what I believed. And so first grade came along, and I was doing great. Everything was good. Second grade came along. I wasn't doing quite as good, but I had my ticket, so everything was great. Third grade came along. It's not really going real good for me because I'm liking to get in a little bit of trouble, but that's okay. By the time I got up to ninth grade, let's say, I'll skip a couple years. By the time I got to ninth grade, I was no longer in those good classes anymore. I was in the classes for those troubled kids. That's, the classroom that's at the end of the hallway that nobody really goes to unless you have to. And so that's where I was. By 11th grade, I was informed by what you guys would consider a headmaster or a principal that I would not be graduating from high school. I was not going to be allowed to. It would not happen. So my father was a pretty influential man in the community, and so the school said, because of your dad, we're not going to kick you out. But you have no purpose here anymore. You simply fill a chair. And as a matter of fact, at the same meeting where my parents were, they told me that the school would probably be better off if the chair remained empty. How would that make you feel? Would that make you feel empowered and purposeful? Would that make you feel like I should really push through this and do the best that I could? Probably not. So let's just say that last year of mine in high school was even worse than anything that I had before that. And things just got worse and worse and worse. So at 16 years old, I made the monumental, titanic, tremendous decision that I didn't want to be at high school anymore. So at 16 years old, I joined the Army. How many of you are 16 years old here? Anybody? Raise your hand. Come on, raise your hand. All right. You guys all know these people. How would you think about them defending your country today? Is that a great idea? I think not. So at 16 years old, I joined the Army. I go off in the Army, but I had an advantage over everybody because I knew everything. I was the world's foremost expert on all matters. Matter of fact, I still am. So if you have any questions afterwards, you guys can see me. So being the foremost authority on all things, when I got into the Army, I walked right up to my drill instructor and I told him what he could go do with himself. That did not turn out so well for me, as I was there for lying flat on my back looking up at the sun. Well, the sun wasn't quite up yet. I was looking up. He knocked me down. I didn't like that. I got up. He knocked me down again. I got beat up 5 times my first day in the Army. 3 times before breakfast. So I was on a great, it was a blast for me. And I tasted pain in all new and wonderful ways that I had never experienced before. So when you are the world's foremost authority on all things and you're getting your butt kicked on a regular basis, I mean, I was signed up to be in the Army for 2 years. So you take 5 times 365 times 2, and that's a lot of butt kickings that you could get in the Army. So I wasn't doing so well. I was hurting pretty bad after that first day, and they don't let you watch TV in the Army. Okay, especially not when you first get there. So I walked in there, I was on a steady TV diet. No TV. All they made you do was run and do push-ups, and I was miserable. I mean, I was miserable beyond belief. So after getting beat up 5 times that first day, I realized that I was probably in over my head. For the first time in my life, I had come to the conclusion that I was in over my head. So what do? What's the answer? Believe it or not, somewhere in the deep, dark recesses of my mind, after doing absolutely nothing worthwhile for a number of years, I remembered something that my mother and my Sunday school teacher had taught me a long time ago, that same Sunday school teacher that led me to the Lord. They said, you know what? No matter where you are or what you're doing, no matter what's going on in your life, you can always talk to God. He's always there. He is always no further away than you simply closing your eyes and talking to him. So, October 15th, 1986, I closed my eyes. And I was lying in my bunk. When I tell this story, I can still see the light. There was a light not quite this big. There were some big lights over top of me in my barracks. I was on the top bunk. And I can still see that light. I can smell the blanket. I had the blanket pulled all the way up to just underneath my nose. I can still smell that blanket. And I prayed that the Lord would help me and he would give me strength. I would give him my life. He would help me get through this Army thing that I'd gotten myself mixed up in. And I don't necessarily believe that God believes in deals like this, but that was the deal that I made with him when I was 16. And he got me through it. The next day didn't go nearly as badly as the first day had. And the next day didn't go nearly as badly as the next day had. And after a while, this kid who was 16, who was getting beat up on a regular basis, started to gain a little bit of momentum within my unit. and I started to gain a little bit of strength. And by the time I got about halfway through my basic training cycle, I was one of the leaders of the platoon. And all it was is every day, when I was done my duty with my unit, I would take out my Bible that the Gideons gave me when I in processed, and I read one chapter out of it, and I prayed one prayer. That was my goal every day. It was baby steps. And slowly I started gaining that inner strength that God gives to you when you're being faithful to Him. And I started gaining that momentum, and I started getting somewhere in my life within my unit, and slowly I started moving in a positive direction. And you know a punk when you see one. You know a kid who is bent on destruction. How many of you teachers out there know a kid who's bent for destruction? All right. You guys know that kid. You can spot him a mile away. Well, the drill sergeant could do the same thing, and when I first walked in the door, he saw that I was bent for destruction. And by the time I was halfway through my cycle, he started giving me responsibility because he saw a difference in those 4 weeks. He saw a difference in me that was a positive change. And by the time I was done the cycle, I was in charge of men, and I was leading guys that were 10 years older than me to do something positive. Now, since then I got out of the Army. I still don't have my high school diploma. You won't see one anywhere in my house. And as far as I know, there's no record at Neshaminy High School that I ever graduated from high school. I talked my way into Bucks County Community College using my Army record, and they took it. And they allowed me to take 1 semester's worth of classes. And if I did poorly, they were going to kick me out. I failed half my classes. But they didn't kick me out. Got through Bucks County Community College and ended up going to Philadelphia Biblical University, ended up getting my education degree. I'm a teacher at an alternative school for kids who stink at school. Kids just like me when I was that age. And that's what I do now. So why do I tell you this story and eat up half of my time? I tell you this story because I have a purpose. I have a purpose. And each one of you has a purpose as well. Each one of you was created with a specific purpose. My purpose is to deal with young people. I had to travel my road to get to where I am today so that I can deal with the kids that I deal with. So that I can deal with alternative kids, kids who have drug problems and kids that have behavioral problems, and some of them have mental problems and some of them emotional problems. But I can relate to every one of those kids. And when I get done, and the kid looks at me and he says, "How do you know what's going on? You don't even know what my world is like." When I calm him down, I look him in the eye and say, "I know exactly what your world is like." You see, because I walked in that world myself. And I can tell them that. And I can work with them. So that's my purpose. But now what's yours? What's your purpose? You see, God made me in a certain way, and my way is I like to deal with kids. So when I'm not working at my school, I would come here in the evenings and I would coach your girls' softball team. Or when I'm not doing that, I'll go to my church and I'll work with the youth group at my church. And so my purpose is to work with young people. I have 2 brothers. I have an older brother and a younger brother. My older brother is a mechanical engineer. He walks into his cubicle at 8 a.m. every morning. He walks out at 6 p.m. every night. He doesn't talk to another human being for days at a time while he's at work, because that's just not the way his job is. He loves his job. He's very good at it. He could buy and sell me tomorrow. What mattered? You know how long he would last in an alternative school being a phys ed teacher? 1 day, maybe 2. You know how long I would last as an engineer? You would not want to be in any structure that I built. I guarantee it. I have another brother who runs software and hardware connections for the Bank of New York. Billions and billions of dollars are transmitted through him to Wall Street and back again to the Bank of New York. There is no way that they would want me doing that job, because I'd be playing video games on that computer instead of doing what it is that they're supposed to be doing. I'd be lost. He can sit there and stare at that computer, and he can write language into that computer to make it do what he wants, and he can do that for hours, and he'll work 20-hour days sometimes, because when there's a problem with that computer, the Bank of New York does not care whether he hasn't slept or not. He needs to do that job. I would turn the computer off after 8 hours, and I would go to bed. It's just the way I'm wired. Each one of you is wired differently. Each one of you has a purpose. And if I sat down with each one of you and I talked to you, what is your purpose? I know you. Your face looks familiar. But if I asked you what is your purpose, would you be able to tell me what your purpose is? No. Because God didn't send you an email with your purpose on it, did he? So you don't know. So how do you find out? You don't know. Okay. So how do you find out what your purpose is? Paul tells Timothy in a couple different places throughout the Bible, you're supposed to listen to the godly counsel around you. Does that mean that you listen to the local drug dealer that tells you, yo, man, you got to buy something? Godly counsel. You're supposed to be listening to the godly counsel that is around you. If you look around, there's a lot of teachers here. They could be your godly counsel. If you hear a constant message from your teachers that maybe you should try doing something with your life, maybe you should take that under advisement. Maybe that's the way that I should go. Maybe that's something I should be listening to. If your parents give you the same message, if somebody at church gives you the same message, maybe you need to listen to that message. I was at a Bible conference once, and I was sitting there, and there was a gentleman there from the Saints Prison Ministry, and what they do is they travel across the country, and they play baseball and softball in prisons to spread the word of God. You can't just walk up to a prison these days and knock on the door and say, I'd like to do a Bible study. You have to do something to get in the door. So their idea is, we'll go in, we'll give the men in the facilities recreation. We'll play them in a sport. And then, in between games of a doubleheader, we'll talk to them about Jesus. So this guy is there, and he's talking to us about the Saints Prison Ministry. I'm at a Bible conference, big Bible conference, and I just kind of dismiss it. I don't want to go to prison. What do I want to go to prison for? I spent like most of my teenage years trying to stay out of prison. I don't want to go there. So what happens? I sit down to lunch that day, and a guy across from me, an older gentleman, looks at me and says, you like to play ball? Why don't you go play for the Saints? And I looked across the table at him, went back to my previous self, and said, why don't you go play for the Saints? Went to walk to the next session. Gentleman stopped me, said, you like to play ball? Why don't you go play for the Saints? And I literally said, you were just talking to him, weren't you? He's like, no, I haven't talked to him all day. So, talked to one other person that night. Why don't you go play for the Saints? Think it'd be good for you. I actually asked, are you having this conversation with everybody? Or is this just something for me? They're like, no, why? See, they didn't know what was going on, and I didn't either. And then I turned around, and I'm sitting in church the next day, 300 people fitting in an auditorium, and the speaker is thundering away on Titus, the book of Titus, and he stopped at one point, and he looked up, and he looked at me and he said, Wes, I think you ought to play for the Saints. And then he went back to what he was saying. And I was just like, I started looking around like, did anybody else just see what just happened there? So, after that, I went and talked to the guy about the Saints, prison ministry. I've been playing for the Saints for 15 years now. I've traveled all over this country and Canada, and over the summers, I play baseball in prisons and softball in prisons. See, I was created for a purpose. And I have all these wonderful Bible verses all lined up that I've used up all my time for now about purpose. you go to Romans 8:28, you're called according to a purpose, to his purpose. Romans 9:11, children are born for a purpose. Ephesians 1:11, you are predestined according to a purpose. Ephesians 3:10 to 12, we have access with confidence to God, who's created us for a purpose. Whatever purpose you were created for, whether you're an athlete, a musician, an engineer, a teacher, whatever purpose you were created for, I am begging you not to take that purpose and throw it away. If I were to try to be an electrical engineer, a computer nerd, a principal, if I was to try and be something that I am not, I would not be used for a specific purpose. I'd be outside of the purpose that I was created for. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't be acceptable at that job. But do you guys want to be acceptable at your job? Or do you want to be phenomenal at your job? I tell people all the time, I've been at Lakeside School working with alternative kids for 11 years now. I haven't worked one day in my life in those 11 years. Not one day have I worked. I go to school, it feels like I'm playing every day. That's how cool it is. Whatever your purpose is, you find it, you do it to the best of your ability, and you figure out how you can use it for God, just like I did with the Saints Prison Ministry. I use that talent for God. I have a blast playing baseball in prison. You guys can do the same thing. Whether it's helping people, if you're a computer person, to help people with their computers, you'd have a blast. Musicians, you guys can go play, but play for God. Athletes, you play for God. Whatever it is that God's created to do it for God. Let's pray, guys. Lord, I pray that you would allow us, all of us, Lord, to find our purpose. Teachers have found their purpose. The administration has found their purpose. The athletes, the musicians, they are working at finding their purpose. I pray, Lord, that you would take each and every one of these individuals, each one of these students, and you would help them, Lord, to find their purpose. All of these students have a wonderful, wonderful story that they are going to get to tell someday about how they found their purpose in you and how you have blessed them in a great and wonderful way. I pray that each one of these kids would have a phenomenal life, that each one of them would be blessed, that you would put your hand upon each one of them and give them a phenomenal life. And Lord, I pray that it would start now, that you would start helping them to walk towards their purpose, that they would start seeking it out, they would seek advice from their teachers, from their parents, from their pastors, from their Sunday school teachers, that they would start looking for what that purpose might be, and that they could start heading in that direction. Lord, I pray that you would bless us all with this day. Allow us to be able to walk around today, Lord. Notice all the great things that you've created for us and how you've given us so many great things, Lord. Please bless us in Jesus' name.